Welcome back to another episode of Sketch Nerds, brought to you by Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. Here on Sketch Nerds, we break down sketch comedy. What works, what doesn't work, what we like, what we don't like, and why. Today, we're going to be discussing sketches from Saturday Night Live and Monty Python. You can find information about this podcast, as well as the sketches we are going to be discussing, at badmedicinecomedy.com/sketchnerds. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Seth Alcorn. I'm Andy Weld, and today we have joining us for the second time, Sarah Fell, and joining us for the first time, Michael Alvino.
Very happy to be here for the first time.
The first time. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing good. I'm just excited to see how this all happens, how it all goes down.
It's important. Everybody remembers their first time, so it's critical. Now, Michael, can you tell us about your background in comedy?
Sure. I got started in comedy first off doing stand-up a couple years ago here in the District of Columbia, and then from there got into improv. I still do a lot of improv comedy here in DC with a group called Stovatron and with another group called Runaway Train. And I also got involved in sketch at Bad Medicine. I took a sketch writing class at Dojo Comedy with Murphy McHugh and started working with Bad Medicine shortly thereafter.
All right, nice. And what do you have a favorite of those of the disciplines of sketch and improv? Is there one that you kind of enjoy more, or?
No, I just love comedy. I like them all. They're very different. I think it's hard to be a comedy lover in like each one because like they all kind of break down in certain ways, and there are skills that like don't really translate to one or the other, you know. So I like staying involved in a little bit of each.
Nice.
I'm always interested in whether people are more scared by improv or more scared by sketch.
Yeah, I was actually going to say it's unusual for me to hear that you started in sketch and then went to improv.
Well, no, I started in improv.
Oh, okay, all right.
I started in stand-up and then went to improv.
Started in stand-up and then went to improv.
sketch.
Sorry, that's what I meant, is that you started in stand-up and went to improv. Usually it seems like it works the other way around. But
Right, yeah. I think and I should say, so I lived in Chicago for 5 years, and I did not do any comedy when I was there.
Oh, no.
But both...
They don't really have a lot there.
No, it's
the
very...
scene even.
It's very intimidating to be like a hobbyist, which like I guess is what I would consider myself. But when I lived in Chicago, my roommate was on a sketch group that headlined at I.O. every Saturday night for like the 5 years that I lived there. And my other roommate was on a Herald team at I.O., the Improv Olympic, while I lived there. So I went to a lot of shows, which is great. Anytime someone come visit me, they would just let me in the back door. My roommates would, and we'd go see the shows for free. So, and they would do things like have writing meetings and things like that at our house, and I would just kind of like sit there in the background with my Cracklin' Oat brand and observe. So I had some exposure to it, but I never really got involved in Chicago because it's like people go there to do it professionally, and I know that's not.
You went to DC to do it.
That's right. No. Well, by the time I had like a professional profession figured out, I was like, okay, now I should find a hobby. And at that point, I didn't live in Chicago anymore.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Introducing our first sketch today is Michael.
This is where I go.
That's
I said, it's my first time.
It is your first time.
This is how it happens.
Your copy in front of you. Pull back the curtain a little bit.
That I wanted to talk about is Saturday Night Live's Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. So picture yourself. It's 1991. This is a transitional year for Saturday Night Live. It was like one of the last years with Dana Carvey and Mike Myers. Phil Hartman is still on. It's the first year for Chris Farley and Chris Rock and a couple other people. And Phil Hartman, I think he was known as the Glue. He was a great supporting player in a lot of sketches, revered at Saturday Night Live, but he never really had a breakout character. And there was a little, I think, jealousy or bitterness from him at people like Mike Myers, who had Wayne's World, and Dana Carvey with church lady and George Bush, and it's pre-Phil Hartman doing Bill Clinton. So Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer is one of my favorite sketches. It's written by Jack Handey, also most known for Deep Thoughts with Jack Handey, which are his kind of like one-liner jokes. It's a very simple sketch about a caveman who was traveling on the ice, fell into a crevasse, was frozen, and then thawed out by some scientists and became a lawyer. I don't want to spoil it.
I believe we have a clip.
Let's run it.
Mr. Keyrock, are you ready to give your summation?
It's just Key Rock, Your Honor, and yes, I'm ready. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm just a caveman. I fell in some ice and later got thawed out by some of your scientists. Your world frightens and confuses me.
Well, he's become unfrozen and clearly is succeeding in life based on that bulky cell phone and the news that he drives a BMW. Michael, what do you like about this sketch?
I like so many things about this sketch. Most of all, I think it's just the sheer simplicity of it. It's kind of got that Jack Handey, like the joke is the joke, and there's no, I think there is some subtext, but there's not a ton. And they tell you what the joke is in the title of the sketch, which they show you. Then they describe what Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer is. Then he has a theme song that, again, tells you what Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer is. First, he was a caveman, and now he is a lawyer.
More singing, Michael.
Yeah, and Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. And then you just see, Phil Hartman in all his glory, delivering this very straight performance as just like a generic corporate lawyer who every once in a while like references that he doesn't understand things.
Yeah.
There's something about the way Phil Hartman speaks that even though it was essentially the straight lines, the lines are pretty straight, it's almost like his voice is dripping in irony or something like that. It's like a molassesy feel to it. Yeah, Seth.
Well, I was just thinking that while I was watching this, I'm like, okay, so his Key Rock voice and his Lionel Hutz voice are almost the same.
Right. And the Lionel Hutz character is
the unsuccessful lawyer on The Simpsons, the incompetent lawyer on The Simpsons. But it's really interesting because Key Rock does have that level of smug self-satisfaction that Lionel Hutz tries to have.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that your take on Phil Hartman being a little bit bitter because he didn't have a breakout, because he was, when he was on, my favorite performer on Saturday Night Live. And I was saying earlier that I've got some feelings about this sketch because this was my cast. This was when I started watching these guys. So this is like hitting me right in the, you remember when you were in junior high and used to stay up late on Saturday nights? And I want to say that at least through high school, possibly into college, I would be in situations where I would be confused or slightly upset by something and then just turn to my friends and be like, your modern world frightens and confuses me. Because Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer was the bedrock of my comedy for a while, that kind of sketch.
I think that's an interesting thing that you said about like this being the bedrock of your comedy and your first SNL.
Yeah.
So I think oftentimes you talk about like, well, SNL's not good anymore. It's
right.
Like, we've passed the glory days of SNL. But the way that I think about it is that SNL was the best in your mind when it was a little taboo for you to stay up late enough to watch SNL. And when it was an exciting new thing for you. So whatever that cast was, whatever like year that was, I think that sticks in your mind a little bit more than other things.
I think that's what I think even Lorne Michaels has said that, in response to the criticism, over the years that has been lobbed at SNL. That's always kind of been his response. It's like, well, are you 18 years old now or 14?
Yeah. The best era of SNL is always the one you grew up with,
Right.
I think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I will
Pretty
say
formative.
it definitely comes in. It comes in cycles. So it definitely comes in waves. Because I'm not going to tell you that the Will Ferrell years weren't great because they were. Like that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I had written one of the things I liked about this. I don't know if this is a real thing. Playing on the naive lawyer trope. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
It is, yeah.
Yes.
Like, I hope I'm not stepping on a point you were going to make.
No.
Because I was thinking you always see these guys in like, I don't know, John Grisham movies and stuff. There's some like rumpled, like Southern kind of, he's like, I don't know much, but I know right from wrong. Right. And I don't know if
Space
you would have
Chicken
seen
from
that in...
Futurama. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was
Space
trying to...
Chicken,
I was like,
right,
who
yeah.
was the chicken lawyer? Yes,
Right,
that's
yeah,
the one.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a thing you see from time to time in movies and TV shows. And I don't know if it was around in 1991. I'm just talking. But
So it was. I didn't pick up on this, but I glanced at the Wikipedia page for Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, and they cited Matlock as an inspiration for it, which I never watched Matlock.
No.
But that's the trope, is the Southern lawyer who's like the good old, like he's not a good old boy. He's the frumpled suit guy who defeats the big city slickers.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think Andy Griffith used to wear a seersucker for that. But I want to point out that nobody at this table is actually yet in the age demographic for Matlock, so that might be, yeah. We still got another 20, 25 years, I think, before that hits.
Not
But I
quite
think
yet.
that kind of like that Southern lawyer thing is like, it's a nice place to, I don't know if it's punching, like where it's punching. Like, you're definitely not punching down. And it doesn't come across as like a strike up. It's just like a nice, like these people, like you don't even realize it's a trope that's being made fun of.
Right.
It's just-
Right.
Now, in the context of comedy, when you talk about punching down, what do you mean?
So you wouldn't want to make fun of, for example, if this was a joke about
A dead president?
uneducated.
Oh boy.
Who would do that?
That's true. That joke happens in the future.
Oh boy, I felt that burn from over here. Okay.
No, but like an uneducated, if he wasn't, if the caveman didn't go to school and he was just a dumb caveman, like in the Geico commercials, then you wouldn't want to make fun of him.
Yes, that was the movie Encino Man.
Exactly.
Yes.
Very offensive movie.
Yes.
Encino Man.
Something that stands out to me the first time you watch it, if you've never seen the Caveman Lawyer sketch before, it starts, they do the intro, they set it up as a TV show. It very much feels like a TV show. And then Phil Hartman's character stands up, and I was expecting a caveman voice.
Yeah.
And when
Right.
it comes out with Phil Hartman's voice, that alone is very funny because of the physicality of the character, the hair, the brow, the face more so than just the brow, and then that Phil Hartman voice comes out, and that alone is funny.
Right. And I love how he takes his time. Like, there's a long beat when the sketch opens and he's in the courtroom and he's standing there and, before he even speaks, like there's just like a long moment of silence. And he takes his time. And I feel like when I'm writing sketches, not so much when I'm writing, but when I'm putting together a show, you're always looking to speed things up and make it punchier and higher energy and quicker. And so when the sketch opens and he's just kind of there, like slowly ambling over to the jury, and then he just kind of pauses. And even in between, like right before he says, "But there is one thing I do know."
Yeah.
There's so many long pauses that are just built into the sketch that I only, that's the one part of it I don't know if you could do today.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I
It does
hadn't
add
really
to the
thought about
timing
that.
so much about that.
Yeah.
And kind of on the topic of it being mostly a straight sketch, but it is sold almost entirely by the characterization. Sarah, how do you write something where the joke is visual and the words are plain? Is that something that relies on dense stage directions for you? Is it working with the actors? Sketches where the jokes aren't necessarily just in the words, how do you communicate that to the performers and then to the audience?
Oh, yeah. That's something, to be honest, I feel like I'm not very good at it. I feel like I usually write my sketches and then put them up and I'm like, this isn't physical enough. Like there's nothing like, it's just people talking.
need to
and
be more levels.
How can I add more visual interest to it? But yeah, I think stage directions would be the place for it, and then like working alongside the actor to develop that with them. And a lot of it is, I mean, Phil Hartman, his comic timing is so good. Like, I have to imagine that was all him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of let's just put it this way. He is a giant of sketch comedy. And but the timing thing, the whatever he has in there, the way he says it is so great because that told me so much about Key Rock, right? Yeah. It told me that when he started out as a lawyer, that might have been something he did in an impassioned moment, but now it's something he does in every trial, and he doesn't care about really selling it. He just knows it's going to work, and he is so lazy that that's all he does.
Yeah.
It took me a second the first time I watched this sketch to figure out, like, okay, he's not stupid or anything like that. He's just like, he's a slimy lawyer, basically, who just uses the fact that he's also a caveman to win his cases. And it's the way he says $2 million in compensatory damages and $2 million in punitive damages.
Yeah.
Right. And I also like the part that they point out that the dude slipped. Right, so he just slipped. It's not necessarily anybody's fault, and it's in front of a public library, right? Because they're loaded.
Yeah, so they're taking $4 million out of the taxpayer's pocket and giving it to Rob Hubel.
Rob Schneider. Oh wait, no, not Rob Hubel. You could tell because Rob Schneider is smaller.
Right.
Than
I do
Rob
love
Hubel.
the fact that Rob Schneider does not get a line.
Yeah,
in this
no
sketch.
lines at all.
He does not deserve it.
That's. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be unfair to the guy, but that's probably for the best. Anyway, moving on.
But I like that Dana Carvey plays it just gets one line, and he's the supporting role, and that you don't usually see him in those supporting roles, and it's just a nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was watching it when I was watching it. I realized something that I think he had something that might have supposed to have been a laugh line, and it just didn't quite land. Which is when he says, Key Rock's words are as true today as they were in his time. Key Rock just spent the last 2 minutes going, sometimes when I hear the car horns, it makes me want to get out of my BMW. Oh, that was true in prehistory? No, I think that was supposed to get a little bit of a chuckle, and it didn't. But you wouldn't know from his performance. It's just something that struck me as I was watching the sketch.
I think watching the laugh or listening to the laugh lines in that surprised me because there are parts that obviously make me laugh, and like the response from the studio audience is pretty muted for what I think is, to me, hilarious.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those, I don't know if it pays off more with repeated viewings or if there's just like a confusion or like they're waiting for something more absurd to happen. I don't know.
I would be interested to find out when they slotted that sketch.
Yeah.
Like
right.
The 10 to 1 sketch or something
yeah,
like
is
that?
it the 10 to 1 sketch?
Yeah.
It's weird enough to be a 10 to 1 sketch.
Yeah.
But,
And there are callbacks in it, right? Like they referenced Happy Fun Ball.
I don't know if those are callbacks, but they ran those before each of these Unfrozen Caveman Lawyers.
Before each one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it adds to the. It's almost like we talk about the TV trope, the bad TV lawyer trope. It's almost like the 50s TV trope where, like, brought to you by Kraft Cheese or something like that.
Yeah.
It's that brought to you by X, Y, and Z that I don't, obviously there's still commercials on television now, but it's not quite as point blank as brought to you by.
Right.
Yeah, I just was wondering. I mean, Happy Fun Ball is a famous commercial sketch. I was wondering if that aired on the same episode and that was a callback to it.
Watch us not knowing. So we're going to have to do
now
that
we're
research.
embarrassed.
It's a very funny commercial. So
we will watch
You have
it.
to watch
maybe for a future episode.
Wow, yeah. Clearly.
Not the next episode, I don't think. I think that
No,
one's...
I think we
Why not? Let's do it.
Okay, all right. We'll see what we could do.
Yeah. So I didn't know if that was maybe it was airing later in the night and like referencing, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I need to find that out.
Yeah, now we have to go look into that.
Would be good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
We've all looked foolish now.
Yes.
But there
we've
is
all-
one
except
thing
Sarah, I want to point
You
out.
don't know.
Sarah did her
No,
homework.
tell you no.
I want to talk a little bit about the button on the end of it where he's running for Senate.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't watch that without thinking of George W. Bush and like this idea of a very cunning and conniving person, which is also sort of how they portrayed Reagan on SNL.
Okay. I'll be quiet for right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And who plays folksy, maybe like Matlock, in order, to convey their image. Anyway, that just like really struck me when I was watching this now. Obviously this was before George W.
Yeah.
It is a fantastic punchline, though. I don't know much about your Congress or your checks and balances, but what I do know is we have to lower the capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Like I've been unfrozen from the way they call it the frozen wastes, which I love.
Yeah.
And then he's like, and he wakes up, he's introduced into the modern world, and it's like, you tax what?
Yeah.
That's outrageous.
What's great is that he was unfrozen per the little read-in at the beginning of the sketch in 1988. This sketch aired in 1991.
Right.
Like, it's not like he's been unfrozen for a long time.
No, he immediately went to law school.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow, yeah, that's a really quick progression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unaccented, as we noted earlier.
Yeah.
Speaks flawless English and went to law school. And so he's quite become acclimated.
I just want to tag up a little bit on that Reagan sketch because that the one I think it's the one you're thinking of too, is the one where Phil Hartman
That's Phil Hartman,
right?
Yeah,
and it's just beautiful because he cuts back and forth within seconds of like, oh, that's right, kids, welcome to the White House. It's so good to see you. Are they gone? Good. Weinberger, go sell arms to someone. It's like that kind of. But it was a really good piece of political sketch comedy, which is actually like Saturday Night Live. That's usually where they're hitting their best is when they're doing the political sketch. But.
Real quick, anything you'd change, Sarah?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, like, far be it for me to like improve on this classic.
The whole point of the show,
sketch.
though.
I think I would have liked to see more of him in the courtroom, like maybe one more beat. I think like rule of threes, because there's just like the one courtroom beat, and then there's the campaign.
Yep.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo it, but I think maybe there was. I mean, his like legal specifics were so funny. Like, one thing I do know is
Maybe you could have seen like a
extremely
pre-trial
intricate
thing.
like legal term.
Exactly.
Or the trial prep or something. I think maybe there was room for one more beat, but it's pretty great. I'm just saying that because I want to see more of it.
Right. And there is more, and maybe we'll watch that as we watch the Happy Fun Ball sketch. I don't know. It's great.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what more. Michael, anything you do differently?
I think the commercials in the beginning haven't aged as well as the rest of it, particularly the escort service one.
Yeah.
I don't think you could make that joke today.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine. I think you could do without it.
Yeah.
Seth, anything you'd do?
I honestly I can't think of anything else right now, but I just want to take a quick second to mention the wonderful visual gag during the opening credits of Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, where he's slamming the stone axe into his hand, and then it cuts to him in a suit, and he's just pounding one-handed to the other as you would do in court, making a point. It's absolutely beautiful. This podcast is brought to you by the sketch comedy troupe Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. Visit badmedicinecomedy.com for info about live shows, workshops, and t-shirts for people who love comedy.
Today's second sketch comes from perhaps the greatest sketch comedy group of all time, Monty Python. Comprising of a variety of comedy legends, including John Cleese, Graham Chapman, and Eric Idle, the group was active from 1969 to 1983, with sporadic work afterwards. Their influence on comedy has been compared to the Beatles' influence on music. Whether consciously or unconsciously, most sketch comedy has been influenced by their absurd and surreal style. Notable works include Monty Python's Flying Circus, Monty Python's The Life of Brian, and Monty Python's The Holy Grail. This sketch, the Architect sketch, is a whirlwind. From a hard-to-understand introduction to an increasingly off-the-rails competition for a block of apartments, The sketch showcases what the Pythons do best, with absurdity, anger, satire, and even satire of satire.
The tenants arrive in the entrance hall here, are carried along the corridor on a conveyor belt in extreme comfort and past murals depicting Mediterranean scenes towards the rotating knives. The last 20 feet of the corridor are heavily soundproof. The blood pours down these chutes, and the angled flesh slurps into these large
Excuse me. Did you say knives?
rotating knives, yes.
Are you proposing to slaughter our tenants?
Does that not fit in with your plans?
No, we wanted
This sketch is dense. There's a lot happening in this sketch, which is one of the reasons I love it. There's a very loose outline of a game happening, and then there are 4 or 5 mini games that happen within that. Michael, can you explain what a game is?
I'm not sure that I can.
Seth, can you explain what a game is?
Okay, a game is, for lack of a better way to put it, it's sort of the rules of a particular sketch. When input A happens, then output B must follow, and usually you see that repeated with one of those things happening more forcefully or the stakes being raised. It's like, Clumsy Joe always slips on the ice. Uh-oh, he's carrying a vase. That's dangerous. Uh-oh, now he's carrying his wife. You know, like that kind of thing would be a kind of a very bad game that I just explained to you. Yeah.
And Sarah, as someone who teaches sketch comedy, how would you improve upon Seth's definition?
Oh, please.
Oh my gosh, I'm with Michael. I don't know.
All right. All right.
I feel improvisers always have a pretty good handle on what game is.
That's fair.
Yes, because we have it. That's right.
Usually.
Improvisers got game. We don't at all. We don't.
That sounded good to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, just, I mean, for purposes of sketch, I'll just call it a joke. You know, I mean, there's 5 or 6 different turns this sketch takes, and they're all in service of like changing the narrative for a new purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like individual jokes in a sketch, and then there's the sort of overarching joke of the sketch.
Theme jokes. Like
Like a caveman was unfrozen and is a lawyer now. Is
Yes.
like the central
That's
joke.
hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. And the individual jokes within that are in service of that
Right.
game.
Yeah.
Is that
Yes.
explain it? Well,
Yeah.
I don't know.
The strongest performance in this sketch for me comes from John Cleese's character, which is not unusual in a Monty Python sketch or in anything John Cleese has ever been in. He's very expressive.
Yeah.
His whole part comes to a head when, after thinking that the, I don't even know what you'd call them, the people who own the land, the investors,
Yeah. The real estate
The real
investors,
estate developers, yeah.
have told him that the block of flats he's designed a slaughterhouse, which is not what they were looking for.
Which is a hilarious joke.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone noticed that.
Yes.
Rotating knives.
Yeah. If you watch this sketch on YouTube, and I urge you to, the minute where it becomes obvious what's going on, you just hear someone in the audience shriek with laughter when John Cleese mentions the blood gutters of the slaughterhouse.
That was where I lost it as
Yeah.
well.
And it's funny because I don't think the first time you watch it, you notice the rotation. You're kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird. Conveyor belt, rotating knives, and then it keeps going. And then you wait, let's go back to what he just said a second ago. Rotating knives.
Yeah, which might be why they put that in the sketch itself, right? Because Michael Palin's character asks him to go back and explain the rotating knives.
Right.
Right. Which like lends like a little bit of reality, because for a second there in the audience, you're like, okay, well, I'm on the same page as these guys. Yeah. And then, very quickly, your whole reality is upended again.
Yeah.
The John Cleese part comes to a head when he starts to yell about how he is not a Freemason, and how first he yells about how he does not want to be a Freemason, and then he turns around and starts groveling, please let me be a Freemason. But I love the way that John Cleese yells. I think what he does so well is enunciates.
Yes.
He speaks with crystal clarity, and I think some of that I just lend it to him being British. And
and educated at Oxford.
exactly.
I believe.
Cambridge.
Cambridge. He was at Cambridge. That's right.
Him and
Cambridge.
Graham were at Cambridge,
Yes.
and they were in the Footlights.
Yes.
And I just love the way he yells, and it's something that it can almost be something you fall back on in a sketch is to get a character yelling, because it automatically escalates any situation you're in. And then obviously when you can, pronounce things with crystal clarity, it even heightens that yelling.
That's one thing like I struggle with in this sketch is that at the point that he does the turn from selling the slaughterhouse into ranting and yelling about not being a Freemason, is that there has been a very well established game of like this guy's trying to sell a slaughterhouse to these real estate developers who just want some simple flats, and like that's fun. Like I could watch that for another 5 minutes and I would just clap. And then it turns on a dime into this seemingly out of nowhere rant about Freemasonry, which is hilarious. And then it turns on a dime again into him like groveling an apology without so much as like there's the justification for it is I don't know what it is. And like I feel like a lot of time that's maybe what makes it absurdist. Yeah. But like, when you're trying to write a sketch, a lot of times you're going to want to justify it. Why would this character do that? And sometimes you just don't have to.
Yeah. They really zig when you think they're going to zag. Like,
definitely.
Sorry, Seth.
Oh, I was just going to say, maybe I better let you go because this might be a little long.
All right. I just on the zig while they're going to zag, it's what I love so much about this sketch is that so much is happening. For me, it feels all contained. It doesn't feel like anything is like too out of nowhere or anything like that. It all feels contained to this very weird meeting, and it really does just throw new things at you all the time. Seth, now to your long point.
Yes, although I'm going to make a short point about what you just said and then make my long point, is that
Good, talk more.
Yeah, I will. I like talking. But the John Cleese part of the meeting and the Eric Idle part of the meeting could be two different sketches. Like you could theoretically have the John Cleese half in like the front half of the show and then do a callback with Eric Idle later on if that's what you wanted to do. But the longer point I wanted to make is the whole zigging when they're going to zag thing is they set that up for you at the beginning. Like one of the things Monty Python is known for and usually does pretty well is link their sketches by some sort of absurd through line. One of the first ones I ever saw, it's when John Cleese was in his character as the presenter, like the guy who says Monty Python's Flying Circus at the beginning of the show. He's at a cafe and he's explaining every sketch. What they do here is they introduce this sketch using their Gumby characters, which if you've ever watched Monty Python, they're the ones with the handkerchiefs knotted on their heads and the glasses and the shorts held on with suspenders, who talk like this. They have nothing to do with what's going on.
It's a weird intro.
It's a weird intro.
Do you guys like it? Do you think it works? It's
yeah.
Intro to the sketch?
It works because it continues on, right? It's these guys yelling
it exists in the same
camera,
reality.
It's like a whole minute of them doing that before it goes up to the room.
Right. The camera, they're telling the camera to pan up, and then they keep yelling that the sketch needs to start, and Graham Chapman's character has to yell at them and then pour water on them to get them to stop.
And it happens so frequently that he has the bucket of water sitting there ready to go.
He's at the
That's
ready.
a
I
good
hadn't
point.
thought about that.
This has clearly happened before.
Yeah. But and then what they do with John Cleese's character is that the Masonic thing really doesn't have a whole lot of basis when he starts, but it makes sense for the character. It also makes sense why he's so mad. He's been rejected by the Masons and he's got an axe to grind. And then in the outlink, that is going to be like a whole weird scene about Masons leading on into the next sketch. So that's how they sort of retroactively justify it by being like, yeah, we had this guy concerned about Masons and now we're going to be concerned about Masons until we get to the next main sketch.
This sketch is named at the beginning of it. They say this next sketch is called the Architect's Sketch, which is very unusual in Monty Python or whatever. They're usually not introducing sketches by name. And I think, and maybe I'm reading too much into it in like a reverent way, but I think it's a parody of it's the most direct parody of other sketches because they're basically saying, this is a sketch called the Architect's Sketch, and there's really not, it's not about architecture.
No.
And maybe I'm seeing more there than there is, but I did think it was unusual that they named the sketch.
You know what? I'm just going to make another point because nobody's told me to shut up yet. So the
barrel through mine.
I'm just going to do it.
Okay, cool.
Sorry,
cool.
my barrel ain't did it. Okay. So the other one that I can think of is Nudge Nudge, because that is introduced with a bunch of grown men acting like school children saying, I want to see Nudge Nudge. But the whole point of Nudge Nudge is to undercut the oversexed person talking to the prude sketch, that type of joke. So yeah, so I think that might be something that they're doing. When they tell you that something is a sketch, they're doing it to make fun of sketches.
Right, and you even have the word satire flash on the screen as Eric Idle's building is falling apart. And it says satire, satire, satire.
Yeah,
which is another game or a beat in itself that I could have watched like another 3 or 4 minutes of, just him selling this building on fire.
It's that very loose, even larger framing device beyond the Gumby character introduction is a brief title card that says the BBC would like to apologize for this following sketch.
Oh, yeah.
And then it says the satire, satire. And then at the end, when they're doing the like fake Masonic handshake, they say that, let's see that again in slow motion. And it's again that like extra level of television framing device.
Right.
And that kind of just goes back to the point I was making earlier about why I love this sketch, is that there's just so much happening in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to say I love every time they do that kind of thing. Like, I love the BBC intros and outros. I love Graham Chapman as the Colonel. Stop this! It's too silly. That guy. Yeah. I just I love quite a bit of Monty Python, actually.
Weird.
Yeah. Weird.
So surprised.
Yeah, that's a shocker.
Let's talk about things we would do differently in this sketch. Michael.
So, I mean, I've said it a couple times already. I mean, there are moments in this sketch that I want to see so much more of, like the slaughterhouse and like the building on fire, and even the intro. I could have easily watched another 30 seconds of that. That's it. And then, I understand the justification for the masonry bit, but watching it like now without the context of the show, it doesn't serve a whole lot. It's not written for the YouTube generation.
It's written for people who would spend 20 to 30 minutes watching one show about sketch comedy.
Right.
Well, it was written about 45 years ago, so that might explain.
Hopefully the people
Different
listening to
times.
it, listening to us talk about it.
Right.
Sarah, do you have any other thoughts or anything you'd change? Anything you...
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like, I don't know if it's something I would change. It's really great as is, but there are just lots of jokes and games within it that I was like, you could extend that more into its own sketch if you wanted to. And something I really liked is this kind of like British, like talking around the problem or like understatement. I don't know if that's a uniquely British thing, but I like it when British people do it. When he says, like, when he talks about the rotating knives and he's like, I see I did not correctly divine your attitude towards your tenants.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, that is a hella understatement because you thought you were making an abattoir. And like, that was the thing that I was like, oh, I kind of would have liked to see like more of that, like that game. Like, I designed this killing machine and I'm going to understate it.
Right.
But that's not, I don't know if I would change that. That's just a thing that now I want that to be its own sketch.
Yeah.
It's funny, we talked about that exact British trope in actually the first episode of our show.
Mm-hmm.
I should have listened to that.
Well,
My
maybe,
apologies.
but no. But yeah, that is kind of this very British trope. And I think on the topic of wanting to see more from this, I read an interview with John Cleese where he talks about, so he left after about, I think they ended the show after about 4 seasons.
Yeah, the 4th season was half the length of the first 3.
Right. And the reason that John Cleese wanted to leave is that he thought they weren't doing things that were original anymore. In kind of this, like, I think looking back and hearing him talk in a little bit of this, like, artiste kind of way. This pretentious kind of way. But I think what makes this sketch so great in its density is its originality. And it's like, this is a great idea that we could flesh out into a whole sketch. But you know what? We're going to spend 45 seconds on it and do the next great thing that we can do in this space.
Well, it's like another thing where it's like if I was like I would never set out to write something this ambitious, and it's really to their credit that they put it out there and achieved it. Kind of in contrast to the last sketch we were talking about, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, where it's really just one joke hit about as hard as you can hit it 4 or 5 times. Here you've got, and how long is this sketch? Like 4.5 minutes, maybe?
5.5 minutes.
Yeah. 5.5 minutes.
The whole
where it's got like how many games would you say are in this?
There's the guys at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
There's just the general architecture setup.
Yeah.
Well, there's the game in between that where the guys in the beginning exist in the same reality as this.
And then there is just John Cleese and his Masonic rant.
Mm-hmm.
There's Eric Idle and his building falling apart. And then there's the callback to the Masonic rant.
Yeah, well, the punchline, you find out they actually are Masons. I do want to also point out that I'm going to say that Michael Palin and Terry Jones have the game of being completely unflappable and unmoved
totally
by
unfazed.
anything that happens. Yeah.
Yep. Seth, is there anything you'd do differently in this sketch?
Oh, boy. What would I do differently in this sketch? I actually think I might have made a bigger deal about starting the Masonic handshake at the beginning, just punching that a little bit more.
Yeah, a
but
little subtle.
Yeah, but that's all I can think of.
There's not a whole lot I'd want to do to change the sketch. It's really one of my favorites. Monty Python sketches or any sketches. It's one that I really enjoy. Any final thoughts, anyone?
No, from me.
That was the Architect's sketch.
The Architect's sketch.
All right, time for final thoughts. Michael, as the guest today, why don't you come up with a rating system or a scale that we can rate these sketches on?
So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you can award up to $2 million in compensatory and $2 million in punitive damages.
Do we need to divide it up?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. Award your damages, Michael.
I would give $2 million in compensatory and $2 million in punitive damages to Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. And I think I would give $2 million and maybe $2 million compensatory and maybe another $2 million in punitive to the architects.
Wow.
I'm just giving the full amount.
Yeah, wow.
the
You're
full amount,
a generous.
The words of the sketch nerds are as true today as they were in P-Rock's time.
Just no need for deliberation. It's the full amount.
Yeah, just give them the full amount.
Seth, how much damages would you award these sketches?
Well, I would definitely give Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer the full amount. I did $4 million in all kinds of damages to that sketch, and I'm gonna do this. I think I would definitely give all $4 million plus 2 to make up $6 million, $1 million for each member of Monty Python.
There
By
we
the
go.
way,
again, the number of Pythons.
the number of Python Sketch Nerds fans, I just want to point out that the 3 Pythons that Andy named in his intro were also the 3 that we described as the good Pythons back on episode 1.
They're all good, but
yeah. Seth also just bankrupted the public library.
I did. I certainly did.
For me, I would say I would give Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer $2 million in compensatory damages, but only $1 million in punitive damages because, and maybe this is my own fault, I thought there was more going on than there actually was. It really was at face value, and the first time I watched it, I just kept thinking, no, there's got to be something else going on here that I'm just not picking up on.
The sexual tension between the judge and
the judge, who was then, I believe, his wife when he was running for Senate. I believe it was the same actor.
Oh no, no! It was Julia Sweeney was his wife, and
was it Jan Hooks as the judge?
No, it was not Jan Hooks as the judge. I can't remember her name, but she. I promise you, it wasn't.
All right, that's fine. As for the architect sketch, I would give it $2 million in compensatory damages, and those guys really got hit on the head with a lot of that water down below. It creates a real hazard. So maybe $2.5 million in punitive damages. And Sarah, how would you dole out the funds?
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I would give Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, $2 million compensatory. I'm going to say $1.9 million in punitive.
All right, okay, yeah.
I'm docking it $0.1 million because it's so good. Those like ads at the beginning, though, they're fun like throwaway jokes, but I don't feel like they add that much. And since you pointed it out, that escort one maybe didn't age so well. That's not, it was a different time. But I'm going to dock it $0.1 million. And then the architects, I'm going to give the full $4 million.
All right.
Going towards all the pythons equally, the good and the...
the good and the ones that are maybe not quite as good as the others.
The good and the other good pythons.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sketch Nerds. A special thanks to our guest who brought a sketch, Michael Alvino, and our other guest, either returning or maybe for the first time, I'm not sure what the air order is, Sarah Fell. Thanks for being on today's show. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have a sketch you're interested in us breaking down, please send it to us. We'd love to do that. You can also find out more about Sketch Nerds and Bad Medicine at badmedicinecomedy.com/sketchnerds, where you can also find links to the sketches that we discussed today. You can find this podcast and previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. For Michael Alvino, Sarah Fell, Seth Alcorn, I'm Andy Weld. Thanks for listening to Sketch Nerds.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by Isaiah Hedden and recorded in Washington, D.C. The closing music tracks were provided by SoundtrackForEverything.com. All clips in this podcast were used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act Fair Use Exemption for criticism and commentary. The Sketch Nerds podcast is brought to you by the sketch comedy group Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. For showtimes, videos, and funny t-shirts, please visit badmedicinecomedy.com.